So, Ivo, we are here today to talk about Belgium's great experience with the concept of restorative detention. This concept was implemented in 6 Belgian prisons in 1998, and quite soon after that, in 2000, it was integrated into prison system as a whole. Who initiated this process?
Who initiated this process? Well, the initiative, the original initiative for this project on restorative detention was taken by 2 universities, by 2 institutes of criminology, from respectively the University of Leuven, where I worked and still connected to, and the University of Liège in Belgium. So a Flemish one and French-speaking university. So these were the initiators of the project. Why universities? Because you can say that is not self-evident. That is not maybe the role of universities to do that. Question mark, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But then I must mention that in Belgium we had a long tradition of cooperation between institutes of criminology at universities on the one hand, and the prison department, the Ministry of Justice as a whole, on the other hand. So that started already in the 70s when we from universities were involved in research more and more about prisoners and about the prison system and so on. So there was a cooperation already built up during all these years between some of the universities and some, well, not some, but many of the prison governors and prison system in its whole. So, and what also made it more easy is that many of the prison governors from the 90s on, from the 80s, the 90s on, were criminologists that were trained by the universities, and that created also kind of a bond with the field, let's say. Mm-hmm. So against that context, maybe you can understand why the initiative was taken from the universities. On top of that, I must say, there was a lot of experience at the universities with action research. So we had already applied action research in related fields, for example, victim-offender mediation and also victim support. There we did, in the beginning of the 90s, very, very much practice-oriented research, action research on how to implement these new practices in the fields, in the justice system, in prisons, or in social services, victim support with police services, and so on. So we had this kind of certain experience with action research, and so we came with the idea to set up action research and pilot projects in 6 prisons. And the last element, in order to understand why the initiative was taken at the end of the 90s, is that we had some important policy or political developments at the end of the 90s, where more and more attention was given to victims and to victims' needs and the position of victims, both the legal position of victims and the needs of the victims for psychological assistance. And so that was also the period where the criminal justice system in Belgium was very much criticized and was in a crisis of legitimacy, I would say. It means that a Minister of Justice and the whole department of the prisons became much more open to the idea of reform, to rethink the prison system as well. So that is the context that made it possible that we could initiate these projects, and why people working in the prison system were very much interested in cooperating on these new ideas of restorative justice and how to put it, how to develop it in the prisons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very complex situation as you describe in it. When the project started, and later also with the system changes, there was one key player, or key player position, let's say, so-called restorative worker. Can we talk about it a little bit? Can you describe this position? Maybe.
Yes, certainly. So after the pilot project phase of 3 years in 6 prisons, the Minister of Justice decided to to implement the project in all the prisons, in the 33 prisons in Belgium. And an important instrument to do so was the employment of a full-time position, a new position, what we called a restorative justice worker or restorative justice consultant or restorative justice advisor. And so that person was employed. So every prison got a full-time person to implement restorative justice in that prison. So that was a group of about 30 people. And they were supported by 2 coordinators at the Ministry of Justice in Brussels. So 2 people had to support the whole implementation process. And then every prison had a restorative justice worker or consultant at their disposal. So that was an important tool, of course, to make that happen, to make that possible. So these restorative justice consultants, at all a university degree. That was a requirement to hire them. Many of them, again, were people who did studies in criminology, psychology, sociology, and so on. Yeah. So what is their position? Their position, they were really hired to play in the prison a central role. So they were working very closely with or at the level of the prison governor. Mm-hmm. So in Belgium, each prison has one or more governor. There's a the main governor of the prison, and usually there are 2, 3, 4 deputy governors. So this is a team of governors in every prison. And so the restorative justice consultants were added to this team of governors. Not as a governor in a legal way, but as an advisor. Sure. But at least with a person with a certain responsibility, with a clear position. So it means when you are working at the level of the governors, you are supposed to work for the whole prison, not just for one part of the prison. You have a responsibility to the whole prison. And that was important, therefore, this position of this restorative justice consultants, I think.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what were their first steps at the beginning of their work towards prison staff, prison agencies, or external agencies as well?
Yes, I think it is important to stress the philosophy of this project and the main objective. And that was also stipulated in a ministerial circular at that moment in the year 2000, when the project was generalized over all the prisons in Belgium. The objective was to create a culture and structures within the prisons that are more oriented to victims and to possibilities to repair something, to reparation. It was really a question of to reorient the way how a prison sentence is executed, to give it another type of content, to give another content to the detention period of a prisoner. So that was the general goal of it. So very much a system-oriented goal, I must say. And what the first steps then were is to create a network within each prison to inform all the sectors in the prison. Not only the prison governors, of course, but also the prison officers, the guards, so to say, also administrative staff, and also a fourth group was the social service, the social service, the psychosocial service, as we call it, and that's the place where that is the department in each prison where social workers and a psychologist and a psychiatrist are working together. So, and it was important to develop consultation with all these services into prison, to inform them very well about what the objectives was and what each of them could do, and what kind of role that they could play. So it was very much on activating all the sectors in the prison. So that was done internally. Get them on board, inform them, motivate them, make them sensible, make them familiar with what victims are and why it is important to work with prisoners also about their victims, for example. And then to make them aware also of their role. What can a prison officer do in this respect? Because you could argue, that is not things for prison officers. That are the psychologists who have to do that, for example, or the social workers. That is this kind of soft work that has to be done by social workers and psychologists. We are there for the custody. We are the prison officers. But we try to do different things. And we try to really explain to them how they could also, in their daily work, in their talking to offenders, to the inmates, how they could work and talk about the victims and about conflicts and so on. And I can give a couple of examples of that later on. So first steps were internally within each prison to inform, to involve, to motivate all these sectors. Externally, there were steps made as well, because the idea was always that this kind of services within the prison should also be provided by services that already exist in society. Okay. So we were a little bit concerned at that moment not to over-institutionalize these new projects, but to make the existing services in society also available for prisoners. So to bring services from outside the prison in the prison system, and not to organize separate things only for prisoners. And that was also done in order to, again, involve social services from outside the prison to make them more familiar and to motivate them to motivate them to work also for prisoners. And that was also done in this project on the restorative detention, for example. We informed and we organized meetings with people working outside the prison in probation services, of course, for alternative sanctions. But we have also organizations working with volunteers who are doing work in the prisons. So you might have them in the Czech Republic as well. Groups of volunteers who are doing visits to prisoners to help them, to offer them some support and so on. This kind of organizations were involved in our project as well, but also, for example, externally to the prison, victim assistance organizations. Because at that moment in the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, we had in every judicial district a victim assistance organization. These were very often NGOs. So we try to involve them as well as much as possible in this project of restorative detention. And finally, also local municipalities were included and were involved as well.
Yeah, the concept of restorative detention is a very complex thing, right? And you, as a Belgium, have had some ways, some specific ways how to implement it. You talked about it a little bit already. So there were some activities towards prison staff, towards inmates, offenders, towards victims, and towards external agencies and community as well. We named already some of them. Do you want to add anything else?
Yes, maybe I must still give an example of what we call the preparatory action. Before you can start working directly with victims and on the topic of reparation or reparative actions, very often there are preparatory actions needed in a prison. And one of these preparatory actions was, together with administrative staff in the prison, to look at how the files, the dossiers, the files were composed. And our finding during the pilot project of the 3 years was, one of the findings was that the files in the prison very often lacked information about the damages and about the partie civile, about the injured party. And some prisoners, or many prisoners, are also convicted by the court to pay the damages to the victim. But very often the prison did not have the information about what damages do we have to pay, and to which victim, to which injured party. And so the administrative staff of the prisons at that moment took the initiative to ask for this information all the time when a new prisoner entered the prison, to get in touch with the court where they were convicted, to get also the information about the damages, because you need this kind of information before you can really start working with the prisoner about the damages. And it was thanks to the efforts of administrative staff that we could complete these files, and so that was a prerequisite and condition to do that. That was just an example of what we call a preparatory action.
It is a nice example that you don't need actually a restorative program to do restorative justice, but you can use some tools to do so, right?
Yes. In the first period also, we organized sensibilization actions, for example, discussion groups with inmates about the subject of restorative justice. So on a voluntary basis, we invited interested prisoners. Would you like to know what it is, restorative justice? Can we talk about it? Just informal meetings. There were indeed always some prisoners, not a big majority of the prisoners maybe, but there were always prisoners who were interested to discuss that. And another action was, for example, to have this kind of discussion groups also with prison officers. Not only to inform them about what it is restorative justice and to motivate them, but also to discuss about their own victimization experiences. Prison officers are sometimes involved in conflicts, sometimes even violent conflicts, because of their profession, because of their work.
Sure.
So it was important to discuss with them, how do you see that victimhood? And how do you feel when you are a victim of a crime? And then giving recognition to their own situation, to their own difficult work situations sometimes, we could start discussing and reflecting together with them, okay, if you are confronted now with an inmate, or when an inmate is starting talking to you about victims or so, how can you continue a good talk with an inmate? Because very often people are very cynical in a prison and are just joking with what they have done, or just minimizing or rationalizing it all. So it offered also prison officers some basic skills, let's say, to talk, not to avoid this kind of topics. When talking in very informal ways, of course, with the prisoners they have to take care of. So another informative action was, for example, to review the intake brochure. Many prisons have an intake brochure for newcomers in the prison.
Yes.
And there was nothing about how to compensate a victim. What can you do if you have some questions about your victims? If you are still thinking a lot about what happened, the crime, then it was clear in the new intake brochure that offenders, the inmates, could get in touch with this restorative justice consultant, or even better, with one of the team members of the psychosocial team. Because by then the members of the psychosocial team were trained as well on how we as psychologists, as social workers, can start working with our clients, with our inmates, about what they had done, feelings of guilt when they're struggling what they had done, and when they had some questions towards the victim. So it is important to inform, to train, to educate all these sections or sectors, so to say, in the prison, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for those examples. I believe there is much more, but let's go to another question for now. We said that there was a project in 1998, then that the system was changed and the concept of restorative detention was implemented into all prisons. And then there comes 2008. What happened?
Yeah, in 2008, rather unexpectedly, a decision was made by the then Minister of Justice to abolish this function of restorative consultants in the prison. So, and the minister reformed that function into a new governor's position, a kind of manager, a general manager to run the prison, to help to run the prison. That was the new task of these restorative consultants or restorative justice consultants. So it means that their task became suddenly very broad, and they got involved in the management, in the governance of all elements in the prison. So that was strange that decision was made, because it was not made, as far as I remember correctly, it was not made in consultation with the rest of justice consultants or with the local prison governors. But that was a priority that the Minister of Justice at that moment put forward. So, and I think it was a little bit a very personal priority of this minister, that maybe he did not believe that much in restorative justice. And I think the official explanation was that by then, after 8 years, restorative justice was sufficiently known and integrated in the daily life of the prisons and the professionals working there, which I think was not true. It was premature, I think, to abolish already at that moment the role of these restorative justice consultants. It was too early, I think. And indeed, you see as well the years after, the number of activities, of which I have given a couple of examples, the number of activities decreased a lot in the prisons. I mean, victim awareness programs and so on. This kind of innovative projects, they are not excluded, they can still be done, but they are becoming much more not exceptional, but not so frequent anymore. So,
that's what I wanted to ask you, actually. But sorry, you wanted to finish your sentence?
Oh, I think our conclusion was that you need a professional person to take care of it in a prison. And that the role of this professional person should be to create the conditions to support other people in working in the prison to work into that direction. You should not, I think, expect that this one person is doing everything, that he is starting organizing mediations himself with the prisoners and with the victims, and organizing victim awareness programs in the prison, or dialogue groups between prisoners and victims and so on. No, he or she, this professional, should create the conditions so that others are doing it, and that you have a multiplicator effect in that way. But you need such a kind of coordinator, a professional, to make it happen and to support all these services within the prison and outside the prison, I think. And then it can become much more sustainable, more fundamental, I think. Because now there are only a few activities that must be organized every year in every prison according to the official regulations. So, but yeah, a few that can be very, that can be not that much. That can be just 2-3 meetings and that's it, and then you have complied with the official regulation. So more should be done, I think. The good point is that, of course, there are still external organizations who are taking care of working prisoners as well. Mediation services, for example, from outside the prison, they can still offer mediation to prisoners. This mediation is not done by staff members of the prison itself, but by independent mediators working for NGOs. So this kind of things can still continue, of course. And there are also other NGOs from outside the prison who are doing still work with prisoners in groups around the victim dimension, for example. That it still happens, but not that frequently anymore, and also not that much in depth anymore. So not in a systematic, not in a structural way, I would say.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to talk about one of the prison directors. You have recommended to me this lady, and she told me that every prison still has somebody who is responsible for developing restorative justice in the prison, but it's among all the other tasks every day, it's really something that is super minimum and not enough for developing something like that. We also talked about situation after 13 years when the project or the activity was finished. Was done, and how actually the Belgian prison looks like in the context of restorative justice today, right? And she said that one big positivum is that the prison staff and people working around the prison already know what restorative justice is and know the benefits of restorative justice. So this area or this atmosphere is much better than before. And she also talked about the restorative justice that is a mission of prison system next to rehabilitation or integration. That's very interesting for me, this point.
That's true. That is certainly true. It is part of the mission of the prison system to contribute to reparation to the victims and to society, to get rehabilitation. It is explicitly in the mission of the prisons. That is important, but it is not because it is in the mission that it is implemented in practice yet.
Sure, we do that.
But it is also true that the climate change and restorative justice is known by many people in Belgium, also people working in the prison system. That is certainly correct. To put that in that way. But of course, you must look at practice, at reality, what kind of activities are being done.
Agree.
And then I think, much more can and should be done. I think the needs are enormous. Also the prisoners. Well, we do not yet have enough staff to work with prisoners. And still, it is of course a question of rethinking a whole criminal justice procedure from the very beginning. We should not start working with prisoners about their victims at the end of the procedure, after the sentence. That is something, that is a dimension that should be integrated from the very beginning, from prosecution, criminal investigation, sentencing, and then also after the sentence in the prison. It is a little bit artificial and counterproductive to start working on the victim and on reparation only at the very end. For example, when they are proposed for conditional release or so.
Yeah, but when we talk about restorative detention, it's our topic anyway. So yeah.
That is true. That is true.
Ivo, you talked about some minimum activities that every prison should do every year. It's called minimum package. Am I right? Can we maybe describe this one a little bit more before we finish our conversation today?
Yeah, I do not know, of course, what the minimum package is for every prison. The prison governors, they can decide themselves.
Oh, okay. I thought like in general.
No. But very often these are victim awareness programs are still very often done together with an organization from outside the prison, for example, with a local victim support organization. It means that they organize 6, 7, 8 meetings with a group of prisoners to start a talk and a reflection together with them about victims, about what the problems for victims, what the needs, what the consequences are for victims. They talk with this group of inmates about their victims, if they want to talk about it. and very often also to invite a victim to talk with the prisoners, for example. So this kind of victim awareness programs is still something that is very practical and that can relatively easily be done in practice. And we have also these dialogue groups that are being done now in several prisons in that minimum package. It means that a group of prisoners are brought together with a group of victims, not from each other's crimes, and not related to each other, but from similar crimes. And then they have 4, 5, or 6 meetings, for example, well coached, well supervised by a professional, to start talking about what happened and the consequences for victims and what it is to live in prison. So victims become more familiar with the needs of offenders, and offenders become more familiar with the needs and the life world of victims. And then there is still, of course, a lot of victim-offender mediation going on in prisons. That is true. That is certainly also considered as this package, as this minimum package. So, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe in the future, your restorative work will be back, delivered to the prisons. Maybe the political motivation will be different. Will change.
We do not know what policies will be, but yeah, of course, it depends on prison policies as well, and of course at the local level you are often a little bit powerless, maybe, when you work as a social worker in a prison. You are usually not the one who's making the official policies, but still I believe that local workers in the prison can work on that policy level as well. They are well placed to tell people working in the central department of the Ministry of Justice in Prague, for example, what the local needs are of prisoners, what the situation of prisoners and of victims are, and to inform people working in the Department of Justice or the prison departments in the capital about that, and to propose new programs, innovative pilot projects and so on. So even when you do not have, I think, an official responsibility at a policy level, you can contribute still a lot, I think. And I think working in the prison, we should all do it, I think, because there is still a lot of work to be done, I would say.
Thank you very much for this conversation, Ivo, and thank you for all the inspiration. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks. Okay, bye.
Bye.